My stepfather said it was just a game. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 28 years old. I work as an HVAC maintenance technician, and I live alone in a small apartment on the ugly side of St. Louis. When people ask why I never talk about my family, I reply that they're busy, and that usually closes the subject. The first time I thought something was wrong, I was 7 years old. I couldn't name it, I had no words, but my body knew. That feeling of skin sticking to the carpet, of being watched even when the bedroom door was closed. But in that house, the rule was to pretend that nothing was happening. It was the only rule that was really worth anything. My mother's name was Donna. She was a waitress in a diner near the highway and was too tired to pay attention to anything other than the electricity bill or the cigarette running out. When she met Craig, I was 6. She said he was different, that he put food on the table and knew how to fix things. At first he smiled too much, brought cheap presents and asked how my day at school was as if it meant something. Then he stopped asking. Craig was a truck driver. He'd go out for days, come back smelling of diesel and beer, and sometimes he wouldn't even get in the house properly. Other times, he seemed to spend too long in his room, especially mine. He said it was a game of trust between men, that my mother didn't need to know because women didn't understand these things. The game started out simple. He said I needed to learn to be a man early. He asked me to take off my shirt and imitate fighting positions. He said it was to make me strong, smart, and brave. But each time the game changed a little. He became more demanding, stranger. And the camera, well, I only really understood what it was a long time later. But I remember vividly the first time I saw that little black device hidden behind a pile of old comic books on a crooked shelf in his room. I asked him what it was, and he laughed. He said it was to record my progress. I, an idiot, believed him. My mother? She never saw anything, or pretended not to. Sometimes I think she thought I was safe with a man around, that it would make me grow up straight, firmer, more normal. But growing up there was like walking barefoot on shards of glass. You learn not to step on it, not to attract attention. I grew up in silence. Literally. I started stuttering at 9. I stopped looking people in the eye around 11, not because anyone taught me, but because I learned on my own that the less you exist, the easier it is to survive. At school, I was the quiet boy, the one who never called anyone to come home, the one who preferred to stay after class cleaning paintbrushes with the art teacher so as not to go back to the cramped apartment with the smell of cigarettes and a backrest. Craig said that only weak men hid, and that I needed to stop acting like a little woman. When I got nervous, he laughed. He said I was too sensitive, that if I told anyone, no one would believe me. Men don't complain about men, he would say. That phrase stuck in my brain like a dirty tattoo. I only really understood what Craig was doing to me when I was about 14. It came to me slowly, one piece at a time. That's when a boy at school was arrested for distributing strange videos in the boys' group. The whole school was in shock. There was a lecture. The teachers used words I'd never heard before. Exploitation, consent, crime. That's when the word video started to make me sick. That night, I went into my room and went straight to the back of the shelf. The camera was still there. Same position, same silence, but I was no longer the child who thought it was just to show that I was getting strong. I started to shake, with anger, of disgust, of fear, all of it. I thought about telling my mother that night. She was watching some reality TV show, with her feet up and a beer in her hand. When I stood next to her, she didn't even look. She just said, "If it's about that guy from school, I've seen it on TV. Crazy people out there," and changed the channel. I sat on the sofa, mute. My throat was stuck. The next morning, Craig came back from his trip, and the camera was gone. Not a word, no comment. He acted as if nothing had changed, as if I'd made it all up, as if my memory was the problem, not him. That was the first time I thought that maybe I was going mad. At 16, I left home. I went to live with a friend from school and his mother, who felt sorry for me. I worked in a car wash, then in a garage. I learned to fix more than air conditioning. I learned to hold my whole body, as if it didn't hurt anymore. But it did. It still does. Because there are things you can't fix with a tool. Today, every time I go into a child's room to install an appliance, my stomach turns. I don't look at the shelves. I don't face parents in tank tops. I just do my job and leave quickly. Nobody ever asked why, and I've never told, because there's still a part of me that believes that if I say it, the story will take shape, that if I say out loud what Craig did to me in that room, I'll never be able to go anywhere again without remembering. But one thing compels me to write this now. Last week, I received a message from my brother, a brother I didn't even know existed. He said he'd found an old box in the basement of my mother's house, a box full of tapes. He said he found my name on one of them, and he asked, "Ethan, is there anything I need to know about Craig?" My first reaction was to ignore the message. I closed my cell phone, left it on the kitchen counter, and went to take a shower. Hot water on my head, my thoughts frozen. I stood there for about 15 minutes, trying to convince myself that maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe it was another Ethan. Maybe it wasn't what I was imagining. But my full name was there, Ethan Thomas Parker, written in crooked handwriting on the side of the tape, according to him. A VHS tape. That stopped me. I stared at the bathroom wall as if it was going to answer for me. I turned on the gas on the stove to heat up the pasta from the day before, but I forgot and let it burn. I threw it in the garbage can without even smelling it. I sat down on the kitchen floor and stayed there. My whole body wilted. Part of me wanted to believe that that box was just old rubble, something from a disorganized family. But another part, the part I'd been suffocating since I was 7, knew. I knew exactly what was in there. I didn't reply for 2 days. I couldn't. His name was Lucas. He was 17, Donna's son with another guy I'd never met. Craig had left the scene when I was 18. He disappeared. One day he was there, the next he was gone. All my mother said was that he's gone on with his life, and she never spoke again. When she got pregnant with Lucas, she called me just to say she was going to be a mother again, as if that would bring us closer together. I never went to that house again. But now that boy I'd never seen, never hugged, never been a real brother to, was calling me back, without knowing, without understanding, without imagining what he was poking at. On the evening of the 3rd day, I replied. Just one sentence. "Where did you find this?" It took less than a minute for him to send me a photo. An old, dirty, dusty box. Inside, 5 VHS tapes. 2 with my name on them. One with the name Tommy. Another with no name at all. The last one with the word game written in red marker. It was like being punched in the stomach. He wrote, "They were behind a cupboard at the bottom of the basement. I only found them because I was looking for an old charger." I didn't reply. I just stared at the images as if they were scenes from a horror movie. But the worst thing was that I remembered. The box. The cupboard. Craig always said that the basement was too messy and that nobody should go down there. I obeyed. I stared at my cell phone screen for an hour until I wrote, "Did you watch any?" Silence. 3 minutes later, he replied, "I watched part of one. It looked like a training session. You were younger, with your shirt off. A man telling you to do push-ups. I thought it was strange, so I stopped. I wanted to throw up. My breathing became short. My heart raced. That boy saw a fragment of the thing that destroyed me inside, and he didn't even notice. He thought it was weird, as if it was just weird. I wrote, "Don't look at the rest. Promise me." He replied, "I've saved everything, but I need to understand. Does my mother know about this?" I was paralyzed. For the first time in years, someone was about to discover the truth. Someone outside my head, and I had no idea what that could cause. I took a deep breath and wrote, "I don't think she ever wanted to know, or pretended not to. And now, maybe it's too late." He didn't write again that night. I didn't sleep either. The next day, I called my old boss at the workshop. I asked if he still had contact with the technician who dealt with VHS and digitization. He gave me the number. I called. I asked him to do a discreet job. He said it was personal. I gave him the address of my mother's house. I arranged with Lucas for him to send the tapes to this guy, who was going to turn everything into a digital file. I needed to see it. I needed to know how far it had gone, how far Craig had gone, because my memory was just a blur. But now there would be an image, sound, proof. I spent the next few days like a zombie, working, answering calls, climbing on roofs, fixing appliances as if nothing was happening. But my head was there, in that box, in those tapes, and every time Craig made me believe that I was the wrong one, the weak one, the problem. Lucas sent me one last message at the end of the week. The tapes have gone. The guy said he'd get them to you in 2 days. 2 days. I wondered what I would do with it. Report it? Show it to someone? Throw it away? Send it to hell along with that man's name? But deep down, I knew. I was going to watch, because part of me needed to see it from the outside, to see what it was like, to confirm that I hadn't made it up, that I hadn't been too dramatic or too sensitive. I needed the image to get out of me what was still throbbing when I woke up at dawn, afraid of the dark. On the second day, I received an email. Files ready? There were 5 videos, 1 for each tape, cold titles, named only with numbers. I opened the first one. I could only watch 30 seconds. There I was, 7 years old, sitting on the floor, looking lost. Craig out of frame, but his voice clear, giving orders, laughing, telling me I was becoming more obedient, that it was important, that I was going to be a man. The camera shook from time to time, as if it had been placed on a cheap tripod. The video was dirty, grainy, but there was no doubting it. It was real. I paused. The room went silent. The world stopped. And for the first time in my life, I really cried. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was ugly, choked up. The kind of crying that comes from places you didn't even know existed. I curled up on the sofa and let it all out. I cried for myself, for having learned that men don't cry when, in fact, that was all I wanted to do at the time. After that, I didn't open the other files. I still haven't. Maybe one day, maybe never. But the damage had already been done. The wound already had a name, a face, a sound. I called Lucas the next day. He picked up immediately. His voice was shaking. He had also seen the beginning. He said he couldn't get very far. He said he cried, and that he now hated his own house. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "Craig tried to do that to me too, when I was about 10. But my mother came into the room first, and then it all made sense. Craig tried again. He tried to start again, but he couldn't, because a door opened. A door that had never opened for me. In that instant, I knew that something inside my mother knew. It had always known, but she chose to forget. She chose to leave me. Lucas broke the cycle without meaning to, and now I was in pieces too. I needed to do something, but I didn't know where to start. I don't remember if I ate anything that day. All I know is that I stood there, staring at the living room walls as if they were going to change color at any moment. The feeling was the same as when you break something too important, and time stops for a few seconds before someone starts shouting. But nobody screamed. Neither did I. There was just that deaf silence. With the taste of something that had been choked in my throat for years, I knew the whole thing wouldn't end there. The tapes, the videos, his voice still echoing in my ear. It was all just the first layer, the most obvious, the cruelest. What really scared me was what came next. I went to work the next day like any other. I called an Uber because I didn't have the strength to get behind the wheel. I answered emails from clients, revised maintenance spreadsheets, and spent the whole afternoon tinkering with a broken appliance just to pretend it was useful. Everyone in the office thought I was reserved, quiet, in my head. Nobody knew that inside I was tearing myself apart in silence, just waiting for a dark corner where I could sit down and not pretend anymore. In the evening, I went to the technician's house to get the files on a USB stick. He was a nice old guy, not very chatty. He said he hadn't seen the videos, just checked that they worked. I thanked him, put the USB stick in my pocket, and drove off without looking back. I stopped the car in an empty street, for no reason. The radio was on low, just noise. I took the USB stick and spun it between my fingers. I thought about throwing it out of the window. I thought about giving it back to Lucas and telling him it wasn't mine anymore. But I knew it was. It was my weight, my history, my hell. I drove to a cheap motel on the way out of town. I paid in advance, asked for a windowless room, and walked in like I was running from the police. I plugged the pen drive into the old TV in the room. I sat on the edge of the bed. My heart felt like a bug beating desperately inside my chest cavity. I watched the whole thing, and there, on that small screen, in that bed with cheap sheets and the smell of cigarettes, my entire childhood was rewritten. It was no longer about confused memories or poorly explained sensations. It was concrete, it was filmed, it was me, naked and raw me. I saw my expression change over the years. I saw how I stopped reacting, how my eyes gradually faded, my voice disappeared, and his, always the same, always smiling, always teaching me how to be a man. Every word he said was a knife gently thrust into me, and there I was, learning to die quietly. After the last video ended, I stood still. I tried to feel something. Anger, disgust, sadness, but nothing came. The body felt light and dead at the same time, as if it had turned to stone inside. In the morning, I left the room with the pen drive in my pocket and a single thought: this isn't going to stay here. I made an appointment with Lucas at a remote cafe near the bus station. When he arrived, he looked older, 17, and already looking like he'd seen too much. We stared at each other for a few seconds as if we'd been through a war together, even though we'd never really been brothers. He ordered a hot chocolate. Me, just water. I handed him the USB stick. He held it like it was a live animal. He said he was going to keep it in a safe that his stepfather used, that only he had access to. I remained silent. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about protecting. It was he who spoke first. He said that after he saw the first tape in its entirety, he started to remember things. One night, when he was 8, Craig came into his room drunk. He said he wanted to talk, that he was going to teach him how to play like he taught his big brother. But Donna appeared out of nowhere. She told him to leave. She said the boy needed to sleep, and she never left the two of them alone again. She knew all along. But even though she knew, she still let him live there, sleeping under the same roof, having coffee at the same table, pretending to be a father. He looked at me and asked if I was going to report it. He said he'd thought about doing it himself. I replied that it was more complicated than it seemed, that the justice system didn't know what to do with evidence that had taken 20 years to appear, and that if I went through with it, I might have to relive every second in front of a courtroom full of strangers. He nodded, without agreeing. He said he would wait, that he was going to keep everything, that when he was ready, he would do it the right way. I stared at him like someone looking at an alternative version of themselves, one who still has a chance, one who can choose differently. When we said goodbye, he hugged me. It was awkward. Awkward. But I didn't flinch. For the first time in many years, I hugged someone in my family. I went home that day and did something I'd never done before. I wrote a letter to my mother. Not long, not polite, not bitter, just truthful. I said I knew. I said she knew too. And that from that day on, she had no son. That Lucas deserved the chance to be free from what I had been, and that if she chose to protect that man again, she would be burying both her sons at once. I posted the letter without putting a sender. I burned all the copies of the videos I had with me. I left only the USB stick with Lucas. And that night, for the first time, I slept without fear, without locking the door, without a light on, without hearing the echo of a voice that said that a real man can keep quiet. Because perhaps being a man is just the opposite. Time passed without much fuss after the letter. No reply, no message, not even a cross message. Nothing. It was what I expected, the kind of silence I already knew, but now in a different form. Before it was absence. Now it was escape. The difference was that this time it wasn't me who disappeared. At work, things went on as usual. I fixed appliances, drove through the city's bumpy streets, and returned home without any major detours. But something inside me had changed. Not exactly lighter, but different. as if I had pulled out a splinter that had been growing inside for 2 decades. The hole remained, but at least it was no longer infected. Lucas continued to text me from time to time. He asked about trivial things, as if he was testing the relationship. A "what's up" in the middle of the week, a stupid TikTok video, a bad joke about maintenance technicians. I'd reply. Little by little, we created a strange kind of bond, made of patches, but real. 2 survivors from the same house, walking on opposite sides of life, and now trying to meet each other halfway. Then, one Saturday, he called me. He didn't send an audio. He didn't write beforehand. He called directly. When I answered, he was panting. He said my mother had ended up in hospital. A nervous breakdown. She blacked out in the bathroom. They knocked on the door for hours until a neighbor called for help. He found out because a nurse called the house looking for a relative. She was alone. Craig didn't live with her anymore, not since the previous year. He disappeared, just as he had done with me. Lucas never knew why. He thought it was just another abandonment. Now, seeing everything with the right eyes, he knew it wasn't just that. My mother spent 4 days in hospital. Diagnosis: mental exhaustion, unregulated pressure, beginning of collapse. When she came home, she didn't call anyone. She didn't ask for help. She didn't even mention what had happened. Lucas went there on his own. He said she was thin, almost unrecognizable, with a lost look on her face, as if she had stumbled upon some truth that she didn't know how to hide. He said he'd left the food ready, cleaned the place up, and found the letter I'd sent. It was in the kitchen cupboard, folded, stained with grease, but intact. Read, for sure. Hidden, as always. Lucas asked if I wanted to see it. I said no. I didn't want to see delayed repentance or apologies, let alone denial. I had already said goodbye to her in the only way possible, but he insisted. He said she had asked for me, that she cried when she said my name. He said he'd asked if he still had a chance. I kept quiet. A long, heavy silence. After a few seconds, all I could say was that I didn't know, and it was true. I really didn't know. What do you do with a mother who turned a blind eye for 20 years? With someone who pretended everything was normal while you grew up broken? Is there forgiveness for that? Does it have a name? Or do we just move on? Lucas respected my silence. He changed the subject. He said he'd found Craig's profile on a social network. Fake name. Small town in rural Texas. Old posts with retired truck driver phrases and barbecue photos. But no recent images. Last post, 2 years ago. He wanted to know if I wanted to do something. Take it further. Report it. Use the tapes, the videos, everything. I said I needed to think. I kept thinking about it for 3 days. I weighed up the pros and cons, tried to predict the reactions, the lawsuits, the hearings. I saw myself sitting in front of a judge trying to explain why I had waited so long. I imagined myself staring at crooked questions, doubtful looks, prosecutors bringing up details I'd rather forget. But then I remembered something Lucas had said, without meaning to, in an almost automatic tone. He said he had a little cousin, the son of his mother's current boyfriend's sister. And something hit me. Craig could still be out there. He could be approaching other families, with other masks, other games. History could be repeating itself in silence, while I crossed my arms, waiting for time to erase what was never resolved. It pushed me out of my paralysis. I made a decision. I went to the nearest police station, with the USB stick in my pocket and my heart in my throat. I asked to speak to someone in the old crimes department. It took a while. Lots of paperwork, strange looks, people who didn't know whether to believe me or ask more questions. But an investigator listened. She stayed silent for an hour while I spoke. She didn't interrupt. She just took notes, watched, and listened. In the end, she said it was serious, that even with time, video evidence was serious, and that they could open an investigation. I left the police station with my hands sweating and my head spinning. I had done the right thing, not for myself, for others, for the boy who, perhaps, was now 7 years old and thought that a game between men was just another lesson in growing up. I couldn't let it happen again. A few days later, they called me. They said they were tracking Craig down, that there was evidence, that he had registered in a town in South Texas under a different name. A lawsuit would be filed, with or without my presence. But if I wanted to testify, I could help a lot. I said yes, without a second thought. The following week, I went to Lucas's house. We sat on the veranda. He gave me another copy of the pen drive, this time to be used. He said he was proud of it. A strange word to hear. I never imagined someone saying that to me, especially someone from the same house where it all happened. On the way home, I stopped the car at a red light and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. It wasn't the same face as before. I was less afraid. There was more tiredness, too, but of a different kind. The kind that comes after lifting an old weight. It breaks you down and rebuilds you. Little by little, I came to understand that perhaps there is no such thing as perfect justice, nor is there an end that can fix everything. But sometimes, starting something is enough, not to cure it, but to stop it from continuing. There were no headlines, no sirens. Nobody knocked on my door with a medal or a trophy for courage. When Craig was located, the news arrived by email, cold, direct. He was in a rented trailer, living with an elderly couple who rented the land to retired drivers. He used a different name, but his face was the same. The tapes were enough to open the investigation. Now it was up to the system to do whatever it could, whatever it took, whatever the laws allowed. I was called to testify 2 weeks later. A gray building, narrow corridors, tired-looking people coming and going with folders in hand. I was seen by a young, focused prosecutor, the kind who doesn't blink when she hears absurd things. I told her everything, in detail, without beating about the bush, without smoothing things over. She listened with the same attention as the investigator. She didn't treat me like a hero. You didn't treat me like a poor man either. He listened to me as someone who was there by choice, and that's what made the difference. After the testimony, I sat on a bench outside, looking at the street. The world went on as if nothing had happened. Cars honking their horns, people selling water at the traffic lights, children coming home from school with backpacks on their backs. And there, in that quiet interval, I realized that the worst was over. Not the past itself, but the silence, the weight of carrying alone something that was never my fault. I returned home with a tired mind. That exhaustion you get when you've given up everything you had, and you're left with a strange emptiness, as if your body hasn't yet understood that it's over. I turned on the shower, let the water fall on my shoulder for a few minutes, and then sat down on the bathroom floor. I stayed there until my fingers wrinkled. That night, Lucas sent me a photo. It was his bedroom. He was painting the walls. He'd thrown away the shelf where the tapes were hidden. He removed the old bed, changed the position of the desk. He wrote, "I don't want to remember that time every time I look at this place." I just said, "I understand." He didn't say anything else. That was his way of breathing again. Mine was silence. Over the next few months, my routine got back on track. I worked more. I took on big projects. I went back to driving on my own. I budgeted for a new building and got a bonus that I only used for small things, like a good coffee machine and a fan that doesn't make noise at night. I cut my hair shorter. I bought new sneakers. I started going to a different market, where nobody knew me. Lucas got a partial scholarship to study abroad. He texted me the day he moved. I was working, but I stopped what I was doing to reply. He said he didn't know if he would have the courage to tell anyone there, but that if he ever did, he would use my name as an example. I stared at my cell phone screen for minutes before replying, "You don't have to use my name, just don't carry that weight alone." He replied with an emoji, not the obvious one. No heart, no little hand. He sent the one with the stone, the one that looks firm, and it was perfect. I received an unexpected call the following week. It was my mother. I looked at the name on the screen as if it were a mistake. I thought about not answering. I thought about deleting it, but I picked up. Her voice was low, slurred. He called me by my full name, as he did when he wanted me to obey. He asked if I was all right. He said he'd read the letter again. She remembered the night she heard me crying in the bathroom and thought it was just drama. "I didn't want to see it," she said. Because if I saw it, I'd have to do something, and I didn't know what to do. I kept quiet. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend. I just listened. She cried. I didn't cry with her. I just let her talk until silence filled the line. In the end, she asked if I would ever go back there. I answered with the truth. I said no. She understood. For the first time, she understood. Over the next few days, I felt something strange. Peace. Not that light tea commercial peace, a rough, scarred peace, but peace nonetheless. I stopped walking around looking over my shoulder. I stopped pretending to have forgotten. I began to remember myself in pieces, but without fear of putting them together. The other day, tidying up the cupboard, I found a box of old things. Inside was a letter from school that I never got around to handing in. It was to a teacher who had paid attention to me when I was in 7th grade. He didn't know it, but just asking me if everything was okay had already changed my whole year. I read that letter and realized that, even then, I was trying to scream. I just didn't know how. I kept it back. Today, when people ask me why I don't have contact with my family, I still say that they're busy. Only now the weight of that phrase doesn't hurt. It just exists. Like a scar. Like the mark of a war won by not giving up. Craig still answers for everything. The trial is being held in secret. Whether he goes to jail or not is no longer the point. He can't hide it any longer. And I don't have to hide anymore either. I haven't become a hero, nor an eternal victim. I became someone who chose not to repeat it. Someone who stood up even after being taught to crawl. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to call it a victory. Even without anyone applauding, even without anyone watching. Because sometimes surviving in silence is the loudest noise you can make. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like and comment on how you felt. Sometimes a simple gesture says it all.